very long schedule with a lot of topics to be addressed, so we'd like to get going as quickly as possible. Let me begin by introducing our MC for the event, who will take over, and this is Ms. Gabriela Kocic. Gabriela.
So, good afternoon, dear distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome all of you here today at our conference titled Israel, the War, and the Israeli Christian Community in Crisis, organized by the Danube Institute. My name is Gabriela Kocic. First of all, let me introduce our first welcome speaker, David Martin Jones, the Director of Research at the Danube Institute.
Thank you very much. I'm David Martin Jones, Director of Research at the Institute, and I'm just going to make a few prefatory remarks to welcome you and to give you an idea of what's going to happen this afternoon. So, firstly, I'd like to thank Jeff and his team for putting this event together, which given the current situation in Gaza, seems quite timely, sadly timely. And one of the sessions is going to be devoted to the war and the atrocity that happened on October the 7th. But the idea for the conference came about really through Jeff Kaplan's team's work on Christian communities in the Middle East. Not only in Israel. And the idea behind it was the manner in which Christian communities are subject to oppression, mistreatment, etc., across the Middle East, not only in the Arab countries, but also there's been problems in Israel as well. So the idea for the conference came about largely around the constitutional crisis that was gripping Israel earlier this year after the Netanyahu government introduced significant constitutional reforms. And you will all know there were significant protests that probably had some implications for the missing, the failure to identify what Hamas was up to. And so that constitutional crisis is now in the background. But part of this conference is to reinterrogate what happened there, what has happened to the Christian communities, and what has happened since in Gaza, since October the 7th. So part of the work that Jeff has done was put together in a TV series and shown on Israel TV Channel 7. So some of that will be referred to in this conference. So just to say that then this is an important event that looks not just at the current war, but the constitutional background and crisis that has gripped Israel in the last year. And with that in mind, I'll hand over to Jeff to make his opening remarks. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you all for attending our conference, Israel, the War, and the Israeli Christian Community in Crisis. The topic is obviously timely, and the issues our speakers will address are of importance to the entire world community as well as to the nation of Hungary. The conference was organized well before October 7th, around the topic of the attacks in Israel on Christians and Christian churches that had, under the current government, become all too frequent. The conference, too, was seen as a part of our ongoing research, undertaken in cooperation between the Danube Institute, the Bociani Lajos Foundation, and Hungary Helps, titled Attacks on Christian Communities and Institutions. The research project is a massive undertaking, with intensive field work to be undertaken in 10 countries over the course of several years. We returned in March from Iraqi Kurdistan, and in January we'll go to Jordan, Israel, and the Palestinian Authority to conduct further research. The attacks on Christian communities and institutions research is our second major research project. The first, in fact, was undertaken at the height of the COVID crisis in 2019 and 2020. This was research into the question of anti-Semitism in Hungary. To much of the outside world, and based on the received wisdom I got in coming here in 2019, to me as well, I believed that anti-Semitism was rife in Hungary, making it a dangerous place for Jews to live and worship. To conduct this research, we did a series of intensive interviews with the Hungarian Jewish community, all of whom were unfailingly kind, welcoming, and very open about their lives and experiences. The research culminated in a major international conference and the publication of a 2-volume set of books titled Anti-Semitism in Hungary, Appearance and Reality, which found that despite the dire perception of Hungary in the EU and beyond, Hungary was in reality one of the safest places in Europe for the Jews to live and worship. These findings were later confirmed by a report from the European Jewish Association, which found that Hungary and Italy were the best places in Europe for Jews to reside. Clearly, what appears in the Western media and what is reality on the ground can be considerably different. This should be borne in mind when drawing conclusions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Moreover, also about the current Gaza war. The savage attack by Hamas on Israel occurred on 7 October. The attack clearly had 2 elements. First was an organized attack on border and military targets that so much recalled the Hezbollah tactics employed in the war of 2006 that it was obvious to all knowledgeable observers that Hezbollah's fingerprints were clear for all to see. Then there was the terrorist element, which included a kind of savagery that was characteristic of ISIS, but absolutely unknown in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Murder, including the murder of babies and children, torture and rape took place, as did the kidnapping of Israeli civilians and captured IDF soldiers. An estimated 1,200 Israelis died in the attack. What followed was an Israeli military operation aimed at the destruction of Hamas, but in the process has laid waste to whole neighborhoods in Gaza, killing an estimated 11,000 civilians, including 3,000 children. The fighting is currently paused for the exchange of prisoners, but will, according to both sides, soon renew with the same or greater ferocity. The war raises a number of questions on regional and security levels and has created a humanitarian disaster whose ramifications go well beyond the region and is soon to impact the EU, creating the potential for a refugee crisis even greater than that of 2015. Clearly, this conference needed to address these issues, particularly from a Hungarian perspective. So virtually at the last minute, a 3rd panel was added to discuss the war and its ramifications. Our first panel will address the multiple internal crises taking place in Israel before the October 7 attack. On my last visit to Israel, I was able to attend some massive demonstrations over the judicial reform proposals by the current government. The anger was real, and from the perspective of an outsider, the demographics of the demonstrations was even more fascinating. At the same time, I was able to spend a significant amount of time in Palestine and the West Bank, particularly Al-Khalil, Hebron. And the situation there was tense. The place had changed considerably from my years there during the first Intifada in 86 through 88. But it was the same people, the same kindness, the same hospitality, but moreover, for the interests of this conference, a sense of security that, while not ideal, at least roughly held the peace. That has changed too in the West Bank. In Israel, while the demonstrations captured most of the headlines, the internal conflict had other theaters as well. There was an upsurge in attacks by extremist Haredi and religious Zionist Jews on Christian churchmen and churches, which has not been halted by the attack on 7 October. There is a long history of violence against Christians in Israel, but never of this scale and with such a dearth of government response. Meanwhile, settler violence in the West Bank, out of the view of the international media, has reached new heights and is actually encouraged by some Israeli government ministers. Violence by Palestinians has also spiked sharply in response. This has greatly intensified after the Hamas attack. The second panel will focus from a variety of perspectives on Christian-Jewish relations in Israel. Our third panel will focus on the war itself, from a global perspective as well as from the perspective of Hungary and the Hungarian government. This will be followed by a final lecture by Professor Tomáš Dezső, who will address the demographic crisis brought about by the war in the context of the greater global picture. You will note in the program that there will be an unusual number of video presentations from Israel and the US. We are very grateful that these participants were able to take part in the conference despite the ongoing crisis. Before opening the conference formally, some thanks are in order. First and foremost, to the Danube Institute and the Bociani Lajos Foundation for making this conference possible. The support of Executive Director István Kiss and John O'Sullivan is much appreciated. Media and Logistics by Melissa O'Sullivan, Rebecca Ilesh, Lusa Horvat, Katalin Hahn, and Isabella Marco is much appreciated, as is the support of Research Director David Jones. But the greatest thanks is due to the researchers who did all the work that really made this conference possible. First and foremost, to Sharon Sugar, who is the real organizer of this conference, truth be told. Gabriela Kocic and Zila Potsai contributed a great deal to making this conference possible, as did Jonathan Zambori. Thanks to all of you who made this conference a reality, and again, thank you all for attending our conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Before moving on to the first panel, titled Crises in Israel, let us listen to 3 keynote addresses. First, let me ask His Excellency Ambassador Yakov Hadas Handelsman, the Israeli ambassador to Hungary, to make his keynote speech.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. When discussing Christianity in the Middle East in this complex situation, we often forget that there are also some Christian minorities in Israel, the only country in the region where Christian community is actually flourishing and growing. Christianity originated, as we all do know, in the Holy Land and hence has maintained an important presence in the land of Israel over the centuries. The Christian communities and the Christian holy places in Israel are held in special regard both by the Christian world as well as the state of Israel. Unfortunately, as was already mentioned, in recent times there has been a wave of attacks on Christians in Israel targeting churchmen and pilgrims and also church properties and religious sites. Christian leaders in Israel and elsewhere were rightfully outraged over the string of these relentless attacks. An example of such an attack was on the historic Protestant cemetery on Mount Zion, one of Jerusalem's most important historic Christian graveyards. The Israeli government has clearly condemned these attacks and described it as an utter disgrace, has taken this phenomena very seriously. Highest Israeli clergies or hierarchies, the chief rabbis and other rabbis, have made clear statements that this kind of behavior is absolutely horrible and is a serious sin according to the Jewish religion law. Police have taken severe measures, and it seems that all these activities are bearing their fruits. Touch wood. Ladies and gentlemen, in a wider context, a common misconception is that Christians in Israel face the same challenges as their brothers and sisters in the wider Middle East. However, in reality, Christians in Israel have full freedom of worship by law and in practice, to exercise their faith, observe holy days and weekly days of rest, and to administer their internal affairs. Israel still maintains the highly pluralistic personal status court system Milet that it inherited from the Ottoman Empire. Under this traditional system, religious courts of 14 religious communities start with their very own judges and who apply religious laws of their own communities are given the right to run these issues of birth, death, marriage, and divorce where it's able, according to their own religious regulations, as long as it does not contradict the Israeli Penal Code. Christians in Israel are equal citizens and are exempt from military service due to obvious reasons. However, in recent years, an increasing amount of Christian youth have been volunteering to serve their country either in the IDF or in the framework of national service. By the way, the same goes for Muslims, but we are talking today about focusing on Christians. This is a phenomenon among Arabs in Israel. Thus clearly signaling by doing this their desire to be an integral part of the Israeli society. Socially speaking, Israeli Christians are the second most successful social economic group after secular and national religious Jews. It is also worth mentioning that the rate of women working is almost as high as the rate among secular Jewish families. I mean, both parents are working. Education, ladies and gentlemen, is a core value within Christian society. It is important to know that more and more Christian children are studying either in church school or they go to study in Jewish schools. And more than half of all Israeli Christians get a higher education. Many earn advanced degrees or work in highly regarded professions and sectors such as all fields of medicine, education, high-tech, and many other esteemed areas. Moreover, their presence is also growing in the civil service, because before, to try and apply to join the civil service was not seen, or maybe it is still not seen in a very positive way among the political leadership, but as we say in Hebrew, people vote with their feet, either this direction or another. And an example of this is a friend and colleague of mine, George Dick, who is first Israel Christian Arab ambassador, who is also a career diplomat. And as I said before, it's not that now we allow, they did not apply. We have Muslim ambassadors, now we have also a Christian ambassador who sees his future, hopefully, in the foreign service. In Israel, ladies and gentlemen, Christian population grew from less than 40,000 in 1950 to over 180,000 today. That's a 450% increase. It is the only place in the Middle East where the number of Christians is rising. By contrast, in the Palestinian territories, the Christian population has declined from 15% of the total in 1950 to less than 2% today. Remember how in January 2008, a convoy of over 400 Christians left Gaza for Bethlehem and did not plan on returning? Remember how Hamas bans any celebration of Christmas or New Year's Eve in Gaza? Maybe you don't. These are facts. But here is one thing you must remember, especially in the context of the current war and its implications, that the Middle East that has no room for Jews is a Middle East that has no room for Christians or any other minority as well. Having said that, there is still a long way to go when it comes to Israeli Christians becoming fully integrated and equal, but we are on the right track, moving forward faster and faster. Ladies and gentlemen, as many tend to forget, and as mentioned before, the Middle East is the birthplace of Christianity and home to some of the world's most ancient Christian denominations. However, Christian communities across the region are declining in numbers because of a combination of ever-growing persecution and violence, resulting in low birth rates and immigration on one hand, and on the other, a high fertility rate among the Muslim population. We tend to forget sometimes that Christians in the Middle East are the connecting link between Christ and the Apostle and modern-day Christianity. For example, the Aramaic language, which alongside Hebrew was the common language during Christ's period, it is still spoken by the Assyrian Christians located in Syria and Iraq. Members of this community are still praying in this ancient language. There are several villages in the area of Damascus, like the village of Ma'alule, where Aramaic is the daily life spoken language. And as far as I was informed, even some of the other denominations, in the Christian denominations in Syria, are using this language in their prayers, at least, or when they in their daily life. In Syria, by the way, about 10% of, at least 10% of the population was Christian, although some of them have been very successful and had very distinguished positions in the Syrian administration or in the business world. They had to leave, or most of them, mainly as a result of the civil war. Countries such as Lebanon are losing their Christian communities where they were once dominant and retained considerable political power in the country. In a minority, under the circumstances, many Christians have left and decided to make another life in the Western world. Now, we can speak a little bit about the Coptic church in Egypt, which is also, together with the Ethiopian church, two of the most ancient denominations of Christianity. And as I said before, the Coptics, the Ethiopians, which is not the Middle East itself, but they are connected. They were once one church, together with the other Middle East denominations in Syria and in Iraq. The Assyrians, for example, or other small denominations there that are declining and almost disappearing because of the wars, because of ISIS, because of Al-Qaeda before. This is something which is getting scarce and scarce in the Middle East, unfortunately, and something has to be done to stop it, unless we want to see a Middle East almost empty of Christians. Ladies and gentlemen, rockets don't know the difference between Muslim, Christians, and Jews. The massacre which Hamas inflicted on Israel knowingly slaughtered also Muslim, Christians, etc. They kidnapped without asking the people what their nationality or religion was. The war that we were drawn into threatens all people in our neighborhood, and naturally, Christian minorities are also at a high risk, especially those in Lebanon. But let me focus for a moment on the situation in Israel, which suddenly created something that I don't think that Hamas, Iran, or all those who perpetrated this kind of attack have anticipated, because if they would have anticipated, I think that they would have had maybe second thoughts, because now for the first time since a long time ago, we see that there was a survey 2 weeks ago, something like this, that said 94% of the Israeli Jews support the government. They are running the fight against Hamas and the attempts to retrieve the hostages and so on. So that's obvious, 94%, okay. But the fact that 70% of the Israeli Arab who were asked also support, this is something that unprecedented phenomena in Israel. I think, according to what I read, the highest was something like 48-50%, but now we have 70%. And I don't know, there's no breakdown how many Muslims, how many Christians, how many Jews. Maybe there is, I'm not aware of, but it doesn't matter. It shows you that suddenly there is unity in Israel. Now, this unity does not signify that you support politically this government or not, but I think it more stipulates the fact that also the Arab minority, whether Muslim or Christian, realize that, well, we have a problem with this kind of organizations, because as it was already mentioned, the ISIS-style Hamas. You know, President Biden said that in certain aspects, Hamas is even worse than ISIS, and I tend to agree with him. I mean, look at the facts. So people suddenly are aware, and the very same way that in this country, it is very common to hear that you see what's happening there could happen here because of these and these and these phenomena, but people in Israel also suddenly realize that, yeah, it's very close to them. And I won't bother you with all these kind of horrific graphic descriptions of how Hamas slaughtered, everything is on camera almost live because of the GoPro cameras and everything. Israeli Bedouin women who were dressed with the traditional, very religious people, it didn't prevent Hamas from killing them. And they knew, they speak the same language, the same accents, the same people, right? They're Palestinians. Those are Israelis and those are not Israelis. So I think that at the end of the day, things fall into the place and people understand what is the danger that we are facing. Now, I know it's not very easy. I know that the trend in the world is different, and I don't envy these people. Some of them are more courageous, some of them are less courageous. I'm not in a position to judge anyone. I'm just trying to reflect to you the reality as we see it, or at least as I see it. But there are those people who are brave, and they are brave enough to show the solidarity. It's the solidarity with themselves. It's not the solidarity with someone, who lives somewhere. It's not an Israeli has to show solidarity with Hungary. I would like to quote to you something which for me was very impressive and falls into this definition of someone who really wants to be integrated part of the country, of the society. And, one of the things that were affected in Israel is sports because, there are international tournaments, various frameworks, football, basketball, whatever, and we cannot play in Israel because people don't want to come to Israel because there are rocket attacks and. There's war. So after the Israeli men national team that they were playing here, now we have the Israeli women that have been playing here 2 games, and they will come next week for another game, the European competition. And on Thursday they were playing Kazakhstan, and it became it spread all over the viral world. In the dressing room before going out, there is a motivation speech performed by one of the players, a veteran player. Her name is Marian Awad. She's an Israeli Arab Christian football player. She's a profi. She plays in Turkey. She studied in the United States. And she said the following. She said, very emotionally, a lot of gestures, that she expects the girls to fight like our hero soldiers that are fighting now in Gaza. She expects the girls to enjoy the football they are going to play like the children who like to play football were playing before they were kidnapped. And she expects the team to win and celebrate the very same way as those who were celebrating at the Nova music party on the morning of the 7th of October. Now this was expressed, and of course it became viral, as I said, so everybody saw it. It was expressed by an Israeli Arab player who wants to be, and she says she wants to be part of the society because she recognizes the advantages of whatever. It doesn't matter. You don't have to explain why you want to be part of the country where you are, of which you are a citizen or where you were born. But this is one example to the way that people would like to identify themselves with the cause, with the state, even if they are members of a minority, even if they are finding it difficult to live in Israel, because Israeli society is still in a way of, in some kind of a trauma, and is outraged about what happened. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to exceed too much of the time. I would like to say only one thing. That the spread of Islam in today's modern world is not only resulting in Christianity collapse in the wider Middle East, It is also involved destruction of parts of the heritage. And as I said before, that's not the theme of this presentation. It has also the implications on the wider world, in Europe, in the United, on the free world. Let's make it short. But I think to conclude that you'll agree with me that a strong Israel in the Middle East also constitutes a reliable supportive element for the Christian minorities. For the time being, Christians in the Middle East need all kinds of support, morally, financially, politically, and economically. The Hungarian government is engaged in this, and we praise them for doing it. Israel has cooperated with Hungary on several aspects. This indeed signifies a joint moral and political interest and commitment between our two countries. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now let me introduce Rabbi Baruch Oberlander from the Orthodox Rabbinate of Budapest to make his keynote address.
Dear Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, Jeff, all participants. I was asked to talk about the way Judaism looks at the other. The other, we're talking here about from a different religion, and here we're talking about Christianity. The Jewish religion has two components. One component is believe in one God, Hashem Echad, and the second thing is Taryag Mitzvot, the 613 commandments. The commandments, the 613 commandments, are only the Jews were commanded by all these commandments. But belief in one God, according to Judaism, is for all mankind. Judaism has a mandate which is called Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, to teach belief in one God and a few more very important commandments for the whole mankind. This is practically the reason why Judaism is not into converting everybody to the Jewish religion, because according to Jewish religion, even non-Jews have commandments and they could live a very moral and life. According to Maimonides, according to the Rambam, the Jews were always commanded to teach the whole mankind these 7 commandments, believe in one God, and a few more basic moral commandments. On a practical level, historically, the Jews never made it to the point where they were able to teach other nations, other people, because it wasn't allowed for us. But the moral commandment for us was that we are obligated to teach everybody, not the whole Jewish religion, but belief in one God and some basic moral commandments. According to Judaism, belief in one God for the Jews is not exactly like belief in one God for the whole of mankind. Meaning, Judaism allows non-Jews a little more leeway, a little more liberal, which is called shituf. Meaning Judaism allows, considers belief in one God still acceptable if you believe in God and in something which is partners, which is a partner of God. It's still acceptable for non-Jews. But obviously it's not acceptable for Jews to believe in God and in something next to it. Before 1948, before the State of Israel became to be, the chief rabbi of Palestine, Rabbi Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Herzog, the grandfather of Israel's president today, he wrote a constitution, a religious constitution for the state of Israel that will be. Means obviously nobody asked him to write it. It was more an intellectual practice. How could we establish a state of Israel which is fully compatible with halakha and the Jewish religion? I brought one volume of it. It's 3 volumes that he wrote. Obviously, he never published it. It was known, and I think was published the first time. 30 years ago? In 1989, it was first published. But it's very interesting the way he deals with all the questions. And the biggest question was that he's dealing with in the first volume. What about religious minorities in Israel? Are there any? Do they have full rights? I'm not talking about from the human rights. Obviously, human rights is no question. Every human person has a right to all human rights. But he's asking about religious rights. Is there anything that the Jewish religion would not allow Christians or Muslims in a halachic religious state of Israel? And very interestingly, he writes, no, there's nothing which should not be allowed. He says, the only thing he says, whatever Great Britain does not allow in India, for example, burning the widow alive, although it's accepted in a religion over there, they don't allow it because it's not compatible with basic human life. The same thing, we wouldn't allow it over here, but everybody would be free to practice their religion. Everybody they would be free to do everything. And obviously, this is when the state of Israel came to be. Obviously, this is what they did. But I'm talking here from the point of view of Israel's chief rabbi writing it, that this is his vision for a religious constitution, as a religious constitution for the state of Israel. So this is what the religious view. This is what the religious view of Judaism says about the other. Should it be Muslim? Should it be Christian? It did happen, as the ambassador mentioned, and we read in the news, certain atrocities happened more recently than before, that Christians were insulted, cemeteries, etc., etc. But I wouldn't even call it that it's in the fringe of the Jewish people. I would rather call it is certain individuals that do such things. It's not a religious way of thinking not even for the fringes of the Jewish religion. Although everybody could do anything and say he's doing it in the name of the Jewish religion, but it's an individual doing it on his own. So that's why, although it hurts, it's not something that really I would call it a way of Jews, of the Jewish people acting, although it did happen in Israel. It's also good to mention that even though in the past many years there have been many religious Orthodox, so-called Haredim, ultra-Orthodox ministers in all different positions in the government of Israel, we didn't have any instance where such a minister would discriminate from the point of view of religion, that not to support something because it's a different religion. And the reason for that is the way Rabbi Herzog had written it, is Jewish religion gives everybody the right to practice their own religion for themselves, although it might not be the way we agree with and we find it proper for ourselves. There's also another point which is good to mention, that in Israel they have a different culture of debating things. What I mean is that usually things are debated. There's a certain culture of debate. Everybody giving the other one a right, at least, to say his opinion, and everybody agrees that the other's opinion is also an opinion which could be considered, but I might not agree. There's a certain culture of debating. In Israel, religion is not debated in such a elegant way. Not all religion is not debated in such a way, and also culture and other things are not related. But it's really not more than a way of debating. And the best way we could see this all is before October 7. We thought that Israel is falling apart, religious and not religious against religious and not religious against each other, right and left against each other. It's falling apart. It's like unbelievable. And then in one day, everything was forgotten, and there's no divisions whatsoever, which shows really that it was not more than a debate, but this is a certain culture, a certain way of debating, very strongly in your face, and very strongly, and for the outsider not living over there, it looks like as if the world is coming to an end, and it's not more than a debate. Unfortunately, this way of debating is not only in Israel anymore. For example, if you look in the United States, we could see debates sometimes about abortion, gun control, which also sometimes are not anymore very elegant debates. It could become rough, but we still have to recognize when it's a real division and when it's only a certain style of debating. So this is also the reason why, if we see, for example, certain young people would spit when they see somebody in the street of the old city in Jerusalem with a cross, whatever, we shouldn't take it for face value as if here, again, there's some very big religious wars in the beginning. This is just a way of expressing things, but when things change and there's a need to show empathy for each other, like after the war started, all these things disappeared, because on the same way of when the person could show his opinion very strongly and not elegantly, the same way he will show his love and empathy when that's needed. So all we have to hope is that those individuals should never get the chance again to do what they did, and then life could go back to normal. I was also asked, will I also speak about the hostages? But I just want to add about the hostages. I only want to add a few words. What we saw here now in Israel is that democracies cannot go to war. In a democracy where every life is holy and important, they cannot go to war because when the first soldier falls, they lost the war already. We're talking about 10. They lost 10 times already. Everybody is sorry, and everybody goes crazy, even when 1 or 2 or 10 lives are lost. And that's why it's not surprising that Israel right away agreed for a hostage deal to save whoever can be saved and stop the war for a few days. There's only in a place where life is not holy can they go into war and not care of what the consequences is and what they have to give up for that. Still, the Talmud says that pidyon shvuim, freeing hostages, which is one of the considered top priority also in the Jewish religion. The Talmud says you have to be careful not to overpay more than the worth of it. You have to be very careful not to pay. You have to be careful of inflation, because if you are too desperate to free your hostage, then the price goes up, and every Jewish life is in danger because of how much even one hostage is worth. But it's very hard. It's very hard to say that how much is too much. How much is too much for a little baby, a young boy, a young girl, an old person. So it's very hard to say, and that's why I really think that also from the religious point of view, obviously I'm not in the military. I don't have any opinion from that side, but even religiously, there's no question that Israel did the right thing, and let's hope they're going to be able to free all the hostages, and we should never have any more such discussions. Amen.
Thank you. And last but not least, I kindly ask Dr. Andor Gross, the president of Majlis, to deliver his keynote address. His speech will be translated by Péter Marvai.
Tisztelt Nagykövet úr, Rabbi úr, Hölgyeim és Uraim!
Dear Mr. Ambassador, rabbis, ladies and gentlemen.
Tisztelettel köszöntöm Önöket, a legnagyobb magyar zsidó felekezet, a neológiai irányzatot követő Majlis nevében.
I welcome you with love and respect on behalf of the largest Hungarian Jewish denomination, Majlis, which follows the neologic trend.
Mivel a mai tanácskozás résztvevői között szép számmal akadnak külföldi vendégek, engedjék meg, hogy az ő számukra pár mondatban elmondjam, hogy mit is jelent a neológia, hiszen ennek jelentősége van a mai konferencia szempontjából.
As there are a good number of foreign guests among the participants of today's conference, please allow me to explain to them in a few sentences what neology means, as it is of significance for today's conference.
Ha a neológiát és speciálisan magyar zsidó irányzatot skatujázni kellene, akkor a legmegfelelőbb leírás ez volna. Konzervatív, modern zsidóság, konzervatív, mert hagyománytisztelő, és modern, mert alkalmazkodik a modern kor kihívásaihoz.
If neology, this specifically Hungarian Jewish trend, were to be scaled, the most appropriate description would be, it is conservative modern Judaism. Conservative because it is traditionally observant, and modern because it adapts to the challenges of the modern age.
A 20. század nagy angol történésze Arnold Joseph Toynbee széles körben ismert elmélete szerint egy civilizáció akkor lehet sikeres, ha egy rendkívüli nehéz történelmi vagy gazdasági helyzet kihívására képes megfelelő választ adni.
According to the widely known theory of the great English historian of the 20th century, Arnold Joseph Toynbee, A civilization can succeed if it can respond to the challenge of an extremely difficult historical or economic situation. Conversely, an entire civilization can falter and fall if it is faced with a challenge to which it cannot successfully respond.
Ellenben egy teljes civilizáció megrekedését és bukását okozhatja, ha olyan kihívással kell szembenéznie, amire nem tud sikeresen válaszolni.
Conversely, an entire civilization can falter and fall if it is faced with a challenge to which it cannot successfully respond.
Azt már kevésbé szokták idézni Toynbee munkáiból, hogy ez az angol történész a nagy világvallásokat, így a zsidó vallást is az egyetemes történelem legfontosabb jelenségei közé sorolta. Azt állította, hogy a történelemben meghatározó jelenséggel bíró civilizáció kialakulása, létrejötte, mögött mindig valamilyen egyház állt.
However, it is least frequently quoted from Toynbee's works that this English historian considered the great religions of the world, including Judaism, to be among the most important phenomena of universal history. He argued that behind the emergence and creation of civilizations of major importance in history, we can always find the church in the background.
Sőt, szerinte az ember történelme alkotó lehetőségének alapja nem más, mint az Istentől kapott szabadsága. És most elhangzott a mai tanácskozás másik kulcsfontosságú fogalma is, ami így hangzik, a szabadság.
Indeed, he believed that the basis of man's potential to create history was nothing else than the freedom he had been given by God. And now we have heard another key concept of today's debate, that is freedom.
Igen, kihívás és szabadság. Ma ez a két fogalom forró kockán, hiszen a történelmi kihívásokra adott egyéni és közösségi válaszaink garantálják számunkra az egyéni és társadalmi szabadságot. És éppen ez a szabadság, ami napjainkban veszélybe került.
Yes, challenge and freedom. These two concepts are at stake today because our individual and collective responses to the historical challenges guarantee us individual and social freedom. And it is precisely this freedom that is under threat today.
Igaz, hogy mi magyar zsidók ma Magyarországon szabadon gyakorolhatjuk vallásunkat, nem fenyeget minket fizikai veszély, ha kipával a fejünkön járunk az utcán, ám nagyon jól tudjuk, hogy Európa vagy Észak-Amerika több országában nem teljesen ez a helyzet.
It is true that we Hungarian Jews are free to practice our religion in Hungary today. We are not in physical danger if we walk down the street with a kippah or yarmulke on our heads, but we know very well that today it is not the case in many countries in Europe or in North America.
Természetesen az utolsó megállapításom elsősorban az október 7-i utáni időszakra vonatkozik.
Of course, my latest remarks has been especially relevant to the events after the October 7 tragedy.
A Hamas október 7-i terrortámadása és az arra adott izraeli válaszcsapások óta eltelt hetekben Európában és Észak-Amerikában több ezer antiszemita atrocitás történt.
In the weeks since Hamas terrorist attack on the 7th of October and Israel response to it, thousands of anti-Semitic atrocities have taken place in Europe and in North America.
Magyarországon ez a veszély minket jelenleg nem fenyeget. Paradox módon a szabad világban az elmúlt hetekben éppen az a szabadság került veszélybe, amely nekünk megadatik.
In Hungary, currently we are not threatened by this danger. Paradoxically, in the free world, it is exactly this freedom that we are granted that has been threatened in recent weeks.
De miből is adódik ma a mi szabadságunk? Egyrészt abból, hogy a magyar társadalom nem militáns társadalom, ezt nem szokták kellőképpen hangsúlyozni, pedig fontos tényező annak megértésében, hogy miért élhetünk békében.
But what exactly is our freedom? For one thing, Hungarian society is not a militant society. This is usually not emphasized enough, but still it is an important factor in understanding why we can live in peace.
Másrészt a zsidó felekezetek kiváló viszonyt ápolnak a keresztény egyházakkal. Ez nem csak a jó, sok esetben baráti személyközi kapcsolatokban nyilvánul meg, hanem közös rendezvényeken is.
On the other hand, the Jewish denominations have an excellent relationship with the Christian churches. This manifests itself not only in good and often friendly personal relations, but in joint events as well.
Megelégedéssel számolhatok be arról, hogy a keresztény egyházak ökonomikus imahetei során a Mazsihisz országos főrabja Budapesten több alkalommal egy keresztény templomban és máshol együtt prédikált Magyarország legmagasabb rangú katolikus egyházi méltóságával, Erdő Péter bíborossal. Ez mindennél beszédesebb arra nézvest, hogy a mai Magyarországon a zsidók és keresztények békében élnek együtt.
I'm pleased to report that during these ecumenical prayer weeks of the Christian churches, the national chief rabbi of Mazsihisz preached together with Hungary's highest-ranking Catholic dignitary, Cardinal Péter Erdő, in a Christian church in Budapest and in other places. It tells more than anything else that in today's Hungary, Jews and Christians live together in peace.
Természetesen azt sem szabad elhallgatni, hogy egy friss szociológiai felmérés szerint a magyar társadalom mintegy 15%-a kimondottan antiszemita, további mintegy 15%-a pedig szimpatizál az antiszemita nézetekkel.
Of course, it should not be forgotten that according to a recent sociological survey, around 15% of Hungarian society is outspokenly anti-Semitic, and a further 15% or so are sympathetic to anti-Semitic views.
Ez jelentős arány, ami aggodalomra ad okot, de nem szabad figyelmen kívül hagyni azt, hogy október 7-én történt terrortámadás óta zajló izraeli háború nem szította fel a magyar társadalomban tagadhatatlanul ott parázsló antiszemitizmus parazsát.
This is a significant proportion, which is a real cause for concern. But we should not ignore the fact that the war in Israel since the terrorist attack on the 7th of October has not fanned the flames of anti-Semitism that have undeniably been smoldering in Hungarian society.
A szélső jobboldaliak szempontjából természetesen mindegy, hogy Izrael háborúzik vagy sem, hiszen ők eleve kirekesztően lépnek fel minden zsidóval szemben, az viszont megnyugtató tény, hogy szélsőjobboldali és Hamas barát nézeteket vallók Magyarországon nem tudtak tömegeket az utcára vinni.
Of course, from the point of view of the extreme right, it makes no difference whether Israel is at war or not, since they are inherently exclusionary towards all Jews. But it is reassuring that far-right and pro-Palestinian movements have not been able to bring crowds into the streets in Hungary.
Ez annak jele, hogy a magyar társadalom döntő hányada világosan látja, hogy ebben a háborúban kik állnak a jó és kik állnak a rossz oldalon. Természetesen itt nem tévesztendő össze a Hamas és a palesztin nép.
This is a sign that the overwhelming majority of Hungarian society clearly sees who are on the right side and who are on the wrong side in this war. And of course, it should not be confused the Hamas and the Palestinian people.
Biztonságpolitikai kérdésekben alig néhány hete folytatta a megbeszélést a magyar kormány belügyminiszterével, aki biztosította arról, a magyar állam megvédi a zsidó polgárait és nem engedélyezi az Izrael ellenes tüntetések megtartását.
On security policy issues, I had a meeting just a few weeks ago with Sándor Pintér, the Hungarian government's Minister of the Interior, who assured me that the Hungarian state will protect its Jewish citizens and will not allow pro-Palestinian demonstrations.
Hölgyeim és uraim, ezzel vissza is kanyarodtam a beszédem elején már említett kihívás elmélethez. Úgy tűnik, hogy az a magyar állam, amely a 20. század első felében aktív szerepet játszott a magyar zsidók kirekesztésében és meggyilkolásában, most a 21. század első felében már képes a történelmi kihívásokra megfelelő válaszokat adni.
Ladies and gentlemen, this brings me back to the challenge theory I mentioned at the beginning of my speech. It seems that the Hungarian state, which played an active role in the exclusion and murder of Hungarian Jews in the first half of the 20th century, is now in the first half of the 21st century, is capable of responding to the historical challenges.
Mi ennek az oka? Véleményem szerint az együttműködés képessége, pontosabban az együttműködésre való hajlam, szándék és akarat. Bármilyen különbözőek is vagyunk vallási vagy politikai értelemben, de a legfontosabb közügyekben képesek vagyunk egymással szóba állni, szót érteni, együttműködni. Ez az, ami a terroristákkal lehetetlen. Egy fanatikus terroristával nem lehet együttműködni, mert elvakult gyűlölete miatt képtelen a párbeszédre.
What is the reason for this? In my opinion, the ability to cooperate, or more precisely, the willingness, the will, and the will to cooperate. However different we may be in religious or political terms, we are able to discuss, to understand each other, and to cooperate on the most important public issues. This is what is impossible with terrorists. You cannot cooperate with a fanatic terrorist because his blind hatred makes him incapable of dialogue.
Ha bízunk az idézett angol történész elméletében, akkor arra a következtetésre kell jutnunk, hogy bármennyire hiszünk Izrael hadászati felkészültségében és az izraeli társadalom moráljában, de a győzelemhez önmagában kevés volna a katonai erőfölény.
If we trust the theory of the great British historian quoted, we must conclude that, however much we believe in Israel's military preparedness and the morale of the Israeli society, military superiority alone would not be enough to achieve victory.
Más is kell hozzá, nevezetesen az ember és a közösség történelmalkotó feladatának megértése. Ez az, amit a modern Izrael felismert. Nyilvánvaló tény, hogy a mai zsidó állam és a mai izraeli társadalom az ősi zsidó múlt alapján tisztában van történelmi felelősségével.
It requires more, namely an understanding of the history-making role of the individual and the community. This is what modern Israel has recognized, the obvious fact that the Jewish state and the Israeli society today are aware of their historical responsibility based on the ancient Jewish past.
Ha megértjük Izrael történelmi szerepét, akkor azt is megértjük, hogy a végső kérdés, amire választ kell adnunk, így hangzik. Egyéni és társadalmi szinten vajon miképpen gazdálkodunk azzal a szabadsággal, amit az örökkévaló bizott ránk? Azt hiszem, hogy a mai rendezvényen erre a lényegre törő kérdésre fogunk bölcs válaszokat kapni komoly, megfontolt és felkészült szakemberektől.
If we understand Israel's historical role, then we also understand that the ultimate question we must answer is, how do we, as individuals and as a society, manage the freedom that the Eternal One has entrusted to us? I believe that in today's conference we will receive wise answers to this essential question from serious, thoughtful, and well-prepared experts.
Ennek szellemében kívánok jó tanácskozást önöknek, és egyúttal köszönöm, hogy meghallgattak.
In that spirit, I wish you a good debate and thank you for listening.